So just a quick highlight. The company might price their offer of shares at a fixed price. So let's say during the roadshow, when they were doing the book building, it seems that investors are willing to buy the share at $20. So when actually doing the issuance, the company might price the share at, let's say, $18. So, but the price is fixed. You want to buy the shares, you'll buy them at $18. Usually just below the price at which they believe investors are willing to buy. Why? Because if the investors buy at $18 in the primary market, obviously these primary investors are going to sell in the secondary market, and they might sell it at 19 or 20, which is the price at which people are willing to buy. If you price it at $20 in the primary market, the investors sell it in the secondary market at 21 or 22, then it's traded at a higher price in the secondary market. Something that might discourage trading in the secondary market. So if you believe that the secondary market is willing to buy at 20, then you offer it in the primary market to the initial investors at just below 20. Or you can make a tender. Now this is the process at which you set a very minimum price. You would say, at the very least, I want $10 for the share, and then you create sort of a tender offer, and then investors will start sending you the prices at which they are willing to buy. Those are for the public offers. But remember, we said that sometimes companies might issue shares privately to a specific a group of investors. This is called private placing or selective marketing. That means you are selling to a selective number of investors. This is usually cheaper than offering to the public. Why? Because you usually don't have to prepare a prospectus, which is one of the expensive parts of doing an issuance. Another type of stock issuance is called an introduction. In an introduction, the shares of the company are introduced to the stock exchange, and they are listed in stock exchange, but there is no raise of capital. That means the company issues shares, but it doesn't get any capital for them. So it's a listing without getting cash. Why would a company do that? Usually it's done in the case where there is a merger. Let's say company A and company B, both are listed, both have their own shares, both have the capital. These two companies have merged. They have the capital, but they still want to get listed. So a new company C is formed after the merger, which already has capital, but this company C still needs to be traded on the stock exchange. So company C will list new shares as company C, but this listing of new shares does not raise capital for it. So it's just for them to be listed on the stock exchange. That is for the listing of stocks. Let's look at the listing of bonds. Sorry, let's look at the issuance of bonds. Not all bond issues obviously are listed. So who issues bonds? Governments, usually called treasury bonds. In the UK, they're called gilts. Gilts or gilt-edged bonds. And governments issue bonds for usually two purposes. They can either issue bonds to finance projects, governmental projects, or they can issue bonds to control money supply. And I think we talked about this in previous videos. We said usually the short-term bonds short-term bonds, which we call bills. The short-term bills are used to control money supply, whereas the long-term bonds are used to finance projects. Other issuers of bonds, supranational banks like the World Bank, like the International Monetary Fund, like the Asian Development Bank, for example. Supranational means this is an organization that does not belong to one nation. It belongs to multiple nations, multiple countries. So the World Bank or the IMF or the Asian Development Bank, they don't belong to one country. And usually these issue bonds to finance usually development projects in poor countries. Municipal bonds are bonds issued by the municipality, your town, again, usually to finance certain developments like building a school or fixing a road or building a bridge. These are most likely American municipal bonds, sometimes called munis, issued by states or local authorities. And these are usually supported by the Treasury, by the Ministry of Finance in the US. The Treasury helps with the payment of the interest. It's called subsidized by the Treasury, and has some tax advantages. Yeah, it's something you need to know. Tax advantages, that means the interest you earn, the coupon you earn on these bonds might not attract tax, or it might attract a very small amount of tax, or you might get a tax credit, or you might get a tax refund if you pay tax on them. And another thing that comes a lot in the exam is who guarantees these bonds? There is usually a third party who guarantees the payment of the coupon and the payment of the nominal on redemption. And this third party is called a monoline insurer. Monoline insurer. Please memorize this name. A monoline insurer is a company that is responsible for guaranteeing municipal bonds in the US. As a definition, it comes a lot in the exam. Who else issues bonds? Agencies. Again, an American invention. Agencies are semi-governmental, semi-private institutions, like the Federal Home Loans Bank in the US, which is called the Freddie Mac. We have a few others like Freddie Mac, the Fannie Mae, the Freddie Mae, the Ginnie Sallie Mae. You'll see them on the next page. I don't think you have to memorize their names. You just have to memorize that these are just agencies. Again, they are in America. These municipal bonds and agency bonds are both American. And these agencies are sponsored by the government. They are semi-governmental, semi-private, and they usually issue bonds to support mortgages. They provide mortgages, or they provide loans. They provide student loans. They provide loans on homes, mortgage loans. We will see, we'll talk a bit about them on the next page. Other parties that might issue bonds, special purpose vehicles, or what we call SPVs. Remember, we talked about these a bit in chapter 2. We said SPVs issue bonds to investors for asset-backed securities. ABS, asset-backed securities. We said when banks usually sell their mortgages to an SPV, in order to raise capital to pay for these mortgages, the SPVs will issue bonds to investors. And these bonds that the SPVs have issued are backed by the bank's assets, usually the mortgages or the loans. And of course, we've got corporate companies also issue bonds. So just a quick note about agency bonds in the US. Of course, we said the Government National Mortgage Association, the Ginnie Mae, the Home Loan Association, the Freddie Mac, the Federal National Mortgage Association, the Fannie Mae, and of course, the Sallie Mae student loans. That's all you need to remember, just their names. I don't think you are going to be questioned much about them in the exam. Government issues. In chapter 2, we talked about the governmental bonds and their issuance in Germany and France and US and UK and Japan. We talked about their maturities, we talked about their names. We said the French bonds are called Bitan. The French bonds are called Bitan and Oates. The German bonds are called Schatz, Bobbles, and Bunds, right? The US government, the US bonds are called, usually called bills, notes, and so forth, bonds, and so forth. So the office is responsible for these issuances. In the UK, the Debt Management Office is responsible for the issuance of these government bonds, UK government bonds. And they usually do that in competitive and non-competitive bids. Competitive and non-competitive auctions. So what's the difference? The competitive auctions, if you're going to buy these bonds from the UK government, the minimum bid is £1 million. And it's usually offered to market makers only, gilt-edged market makers, GEMs. Remember, we said these are the market makers allowed to buy the government bonds from the UK government. And the winner pays on price. So when you are bidding, if you offer to buy every 100 nominal for 102, somebody else offered to pay 103, you both win, you're going to pay 102, and they are going to be 103. Whatever we offered, if we win, that's the price we are going to pay. These are the competitive auctions from the UK government. And then you've got the non-competitive auctions. And at the minimum, these are usually offered to the public, to the retail. You know, everybody in the public usually invited to buy. The minimum to bid is just £1,000. £1,000 is the minimum. And usually the price is the weighted average. So if you are lucky to win the bid, then the DMO, the Debt Management Office, will calculate the weighted average price offered, and then everybody will pay the same price, which is the weighted average. So price is the weighted average. Everybody pays the same. Right. So we've got the competitive auctions and the non-competitive auctions from the UK government. The competitive auctions have a minimum bid of £1 million. They are offered to market makers, gilt-edged market makers, the GEMs, and whoever wins the auction pays whatever price that they offered. The non-competitive auctions are offered to the public, minimum £1,000. And the price is the weighted average price offered, and everybody pays the same price, which is the weighted average. The French and the German government have the same system. The US government is a bit different. The US government has what we call the tender style, whereas everybody pays a single price. The winners pay a single price, and it is offered. We'll give an example on the next page. The US government, the Federal Reserve, which is the central bank of the US, offers these government bonds in the US. Particularly, the office under the Federal Reserve is called the Bureau of Fiscal Service. I think I misspelled Bureau. The Bureau of Fiscal Service is the office under the Federal Reserve that issues the government bonds on behalf of the US government. So how does the US government, through its tender style, which is a bit different than the auctions, this tender style is sometimes called a Dutch auction. We'll talk about how that differs, how this Dutch auction, sometimes called the tender style, differs from the other types of auctions from the other governments. Let's look at a quick example and see how an auction in the UK differs from a tender in the US. So this is an auction by the government to raise £100 million of nominal value at a market price of 101. So who offered? We've got three gems. Remember, this is an auction, so it's in the UK. Three gilt-edged market makers offered. The first one, ABC, offered to pay £102.5 for every 50 million nominal. DCF, 101.75 for every 50 million nominal. Remember, the government is looking to raise 100 million nominal. So the best two prices are these, because 50-50, that's 100, done. That's how much we intend to raise, 100 million nominal. So whatever this GHI has offered, I'm sorry, we cannot accept you because the best two offers have completed the auction. So ABC, DCF offered these prices. They won the auction. How much are they going to pay? Since this is an auction, they will pay what they offered. Now, in a tender style, which is a style that the US uses, I'm just going to put this in dollars. So to remind you that this is dollars. Again, we want to raise 100 million of nominal value. We've got the following offers. We've got ABC offered 102.5 for 50 million nominal, same thing. DCF, 101.75 for 50 million nominal. Again, we apologize to GHI because the first two were able to raise what we wanted, so we no longer need the offer from GHI. Good. How much will ABC and DCF pay? Well, under the tender style, they will pay the lowest successful price. Both of them will pay the lowest successful price. What was the lowest successful price? 101.75. So both of them, both ABC and DCF, will pay 101.75. I'm changing it to dollars to remind you that this is the American style. This is what the US government uses when they're issuing their bonds. Again, it's a popular question in the exam. So CISI might tell you that there's this government issuing the bonds. These are the bidders who submitted their bids. These are the prices that they submitted. This is the UK government. So you are automatically expected to know, first of all, who won. You just add the top prices as long as you have raised the requested capital. And then in the UK, you pay whatever you offered. So ABC will pay 102, DCF will pay 101. In the US, it's a tender. And in a tender, the winners, all of the winners will pay the lowest successful price. It's very important that you practice this because it comes in the exam. Hamad has a question. Is that how they are injecting the money they're printing in the economy? There are many, many ways that they're injecting it. The US government injects, but there are many ways. I mean, during COVID, they actually, the Federal Reserve actually injected the cash to Vanguard and BlackRock. You know, these are the largest ETFs in the world, right? Because Vanguard and BlackRock hold so much of US money. They hold trillions of dollars between, because they are the two largest. Instead of injecting the cash, all of it to the banks, the Federal Reserve injected some of the cash to Vanguard and BlackRock, the fund managers. The Fed also uses repos. Remember repos we covered in chapter 2? A repo is a sale and a repurchase agreement where the Fed can buy bonds from the banks and pay them cash. And then this repo basically says that the bank will rebuy that bond and give the cash back to the Federal Reserve later. There are many, many ways that the Fed can inject cash in the US, and they are getting creative with that. I said this repo market was a big problem last year. The Fed was pumping, I think, around 50 billion every month. Yeah, I think it was 50 billion every month. Yeah, you can follow up on the repo problem with the Federal Reserve. It's a good way. To understand how the Fed finances the market. Hamad is saying, is the stimulus checks also another way? The stimulus checks are a different way. So you have to separate the Treasury, which is the Ministry of Finance, from the Federal Reserve, which is the central bank. So the Federal Reserve is responsible for two main areas, and that is the money supply, how much money they are injecting, and the interest rates, controlling of interest rates. And I think recently the US Congress extended that mandate and included a few more responsibilities. The Treasury is responsible for, the Ministry of Finance is responsible for taxes, increasing or decreasing taxes, and government spending. How much the government is spending in the country. I think those stimulus checks, Hamad, that you're talking about, came out of the Ministry of Finance spending, the government spending. They did not come out of the Federal Reserve printing. That's what I suspect. But of course, this is outside the syllabus, something that we can research later. That's a good question. You made me think. So these are the government issues. Let's look at the corporate issues of bonds. Why do companies issue bonds? Obviously, they need capital. Remember, the capital structure of a company is both equity, the shares that it issues, and the bonds that it issues. They need capital. And issuance of shares takes a longer time, and it puts a lot of commitment on the company, because once you've issued shares and somebody has bought them, it's done. You're committed to life. You can't get rid of them anymore, basically. But with bonds, you can basically raise capital, pay it off with the interest, and you're done with it. And it's cheaper to raise capital through bonds, through debt. Not just that, the coupon, the interest, since you are the company, you're issuing the bond, you have to pay coupon to the investor. The coupon is tax deductible, so you can save tax on the coupon you are paying. So you can either do it through scheduled programs, where you can arrange with the bank to borrow money rather than issue bonds if you need debt. So you can speak with the bank, and the bank will finance you at $1 million every 6 months, for example. Or you can do something called a shelf registration. Again, this is something that was invented in the US. Every time a company wants to issue bonds, obviously they need to go to the regulator, they need to take approval from the regulator, there's a lot of paperwork, there's a lot of marketing and roadshow. It's a long process, it's a process. So in the US, they invented this shelf registration where a company takes an approval, a single approval from the regulator, and it can issue as many bonds as they want within 2 years. No need to go every time you want to issue a bond. No need to go back to the government. We've given you a single approval for 2 years. Issue as many bonds as you want. This is usually called a medium-term note. A medium-term note is the name of the bond that is issued under a shelf registration. It has a big advantage, it saves a lot of time and a lot of money. And sometimes these companies do not issue all of the bonds at once. Sometimes the company might issue a part, and then the company might wait for demand. The investor can go to the company and say, we're interested in buying some of your bonds. Since the company already has approval for 2 years, then they can issue this new investor a certain number of bonds. So certain bonds are issued when investors request them. This is called a reverse inquiry. Reverse inquiry is when bonds are issued at the request of client under a single shelf registration. Now, finally, the different stages of issuing a bond, just like in the stocks. Well, first of all, you announce as a company that you want to issue bonds. So investment banks come to you and then they do a presentation, their pitch. Investment bank A, B, C, and D say, this is what we'll do. These are our fees. This is how we'll help you raise the capital, blah, blah, blah. Basically, they're selling themselves to you. And then there's something called the indicative bid. This is where the investment bank gives you, the issuer, how much the bond issue might raise. It's part of their pitch to you, saying, okay, look, how much do you want to raise? 100 million through debt? I don't think the market is capable of that. I think you can raise maximum 50 million. And then all of these investment banks, after they've done their pitch and their bid, you announce the investment bank that you have chosen to help you with the issuance of that bond. Now, remember that bond is a credit instrument. And for many governments and companies, before they start selling this bond, investors might require to know the credit rating of that bond. Is that a incredibly safe bond, has a rating of AAA? Or is this a medium bond like BBB? Or is it a bad bond like a junk bond, CCC? So the investment bank will speak with a few credit rating agencies such as Fitch, Moody's, and S&P and obtain a rating for that bond. Why? Why is it important? Because the coupon that the bond will pay depends on the rating that you get. So if Fitch, Moody's, and S&P give this bond a AAA rating, your maximum safety, you as an issuer, you don't have to pay much coupon. You can just pay maybe 1% or 2%. Investors would be happy to buy that bond because you are incredibly safe. If these rating agencies give you a junk rating, then you probably have to pay like 10% coupon on that bond just to encourage investors to buy your bond. Once you've obtained the credit rating, this is when you'll start marketing to the investors in the market. You go jump from investor to investor, you do your roadshow. And if you want to get listed on the stock exchange, this is when you start considering listing.